to. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos es justicia, es paz para el mundo. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos es justicia, es paz para el mundo. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos es dar nuevas de vida a los pobres. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos es dar nuevas de vida a los pobres. Todos, la fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos, anunciar libertad a los cautivos. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos, anunciar libertad a los cautivos. Todos, la fe, eso, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos, aliviar del quebranto al que sufre. El mensaje que hoy proclamamos, aliviar del quebranto al que sufre. Todos, la fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. One last time, la fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La fe, el amor, la esperanza de un mundo mejor. La esperanza de un mundo mejor.
Wow, what great music. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So I want to give a reminder that today's panel, we will have English and Spanish translation as we have a Spanish-speaking panelist. So everyone will need to open this session using Zoom. So when you get the option to open on Attentify or Zoom, click Zoom. If you are using the app, we'll put the Zoom link in the chat for you. I think Becca did that. For those who are using a web browser to access Attentify, you'll need to exit out of this session and come back and click Open the Zoom app. We'll give you a second to do that now. Go ahead, you can do it now. We'll pause for a second. So for those of you who are in Zoom, in your meeting controls at the bottom of your screen, click on the interpretation button and select the language you want to hear, English or Spanish. And that's how you do it. And the instructions will be in the chat as well. Okay, so weren't today's workshops great? Put in the chat what workshops you went to. We would love to hear about them, so let us all know. And also, I wanted to let everyone know we have an exciting plenary coming up, and I'm going to pass it to my co-MC, Christian, for introducing the panel and the panel organizers.
Thank you so much, Annika. Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Brooks. I am the representative for domestic issues for the Presbyterian Church USA Office of Public Witness, and I will be one of your 3 co-hosts / MCs for the duration of the conference. I am so excited to see so many people here today. You know, it's unfortunate and I'm a little sad that we couldn't be in person, but the blessing about technology is that EAD is now available to so many people who would not have been able to make it to DC. So I am happy to see all of y'all. I'm from Missouri, so we say y'all. Shout out to all my people from Missouri. So I hope you all enjoyed your morning session. We have a great conversation planned for you all this evening. Up next, we have a panel discussion on domestic and global engagements of climate justice. So this panel will be moderated by Becca Choate, who is the Associate for Global Advocacy and Education for Global Ministries for the United Church of Christ. Now, Becca has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure this conference goes well and runs smoothly. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Becca. And the next person is a woman who I admire a great deal, the Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith. So Angelique is the Senior Associate for Pan-African and Orthodox Church Engagement for Bread for the World, and somebody that I am so blessed to say that I know. Now listen, these two alone can engage you in an insightful dialogue on this topic, so I am very excited to see what this panel has in store for us. So without further ado, I will get out of the way and pass it over to you, Angelique and Becca.
Thanks so much, Christian. I'm very glad to be here, very excited for this panel. You know, we've been working on this now for at least a month to get this all together and get everyone where they need to be. So I'm excited that the day has come and we're all together. So I'm going to open us in prayer. I'm going to read a prayer from Matt Laney. He is a member of the United Church of Christ Still Speaking Writers Group. And he wrote this as part of our, we put a little devotion booklet together called Emerge, Blessings and Rituals for Unsheltering from the Pandemic. So this prayer is called Blessing for Mother Earth as Pollution Increases. So please join me in a spirit of prayer. You sent us all to our rooms for bad behavior, to think about all that we had done and had left undone, while you put your feet up, read some romance, and just took a breather. Soon we felt the pinch, decided it was no fun, and that we were done. Hope you enjoyed your extended Mother's Day. But the market is down. People need work, and the kids are bonkers. We are warriors now, defending our normal, even though that was killing us too. Bless you, Gaia, Great Mother, Eco-Sister, Auntie Terra. Bless us too, because though we failed to honor it, we are you. Bless lungs and trees, breathing together. Bless flesh and soil, earthy wrappers both. Bless veins and rivers, running as one. Bless bones and stones, like unto like. Bless us with compassion for our great matriarch as her cough, infection, and fever returns. Amen. So I'm going to now turn it over to Angelique, who will introduce our panel discussion and our panelists. Thank you, Angelique.
Rebecca, thank you so very much for that wonderful renderance. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. And over to Christian and Annika. Hey, thanks so much. You're doing a great job, and your kind words are so much appreciated. On behalf of Rebecca and Catherine and myself, Angelique, we are so grateful that we've had opportunity to help organize this time together on behalf of the EAD leadership team, who we thank for allowing us to serve the entire movement together. We are so grateful that our distinguished panelists have agreed to join us today and to share out their inputs on what does climate justice mean to them. What is climate justice in the context, in the domestic and the global spaces in which we inhabit together? We're going to learn from each other. We're grateful that the EAD team has come together to allow for simultaneous translation, to allow for us to be together across the great universal space through technology. Is really remarkable what it is we can do now. And so we just give thanks to God for the opportunity. Of course, climate justice means different things to different people in different parts of the world. The values are still there, the issues around equity, the issues around justice, the climate shocks all of us are experiencing. These are universal pieces that bring us together. Of course, our faith brings us together, right? And our vision of what it means to be an inclusive community in this moment. What does it mean to be the people of God who are lifting up our voices? The ancient days of the prophets, the ancient days of the pastors, and the advocates who are based in scripture, but in various spiritualities that many of us are aware of or are associated with. This is a moment that we claim in the African tradition of St. Clover. We are the embodiment now. From the past, we are the embodiment for this moment. We are the embodiment breathing life into the future. And so we think of our children, we think of our communities, and what needs to be done. We are so glad that if EAD, it is not just a matter of educating conversation, but it's also a moment for action. So as you're hearing the different stories, as you're hearing the various contexts, be mindful of what we are going to be doing on Wednesday. Where does this lead us for action? To speak up, speak out on behalf of our brothers and sisters, wherever we may be. So we are delighted to further this particular moment with a conversation with friends from 4 different parts of the world. The process in which we will be engaged during this time will include an opportunity for you to be a part of this time. That includes using the chat. The chat, I have learned, has become an important function in anything that you do online. I'm sure many of you appreciate that as well. So use the chat to express your questions, to bring your clarifications, or whatever else you feel is appropriate for this moment. I am pleased to say that our colleagues will be monitoring the chat closely. The format of presentation will be that each speaker has been requested to speak 9 to 10 minutes for whatever they believe is important in this moment to share as we think about climate justice around the world, as we think about leading to action on Wednesday, 9 to 10 minutes. It is my joy now to introduce our first panelist, who comes to us all the way from Fiji. I am very honored to say I've been to Fiji, I've been to the Pacific, and I've worked with the Pacific Conference of Churches, and I am just thrilled to have Reverend Bakwan with us, who is an ordained minister of the Methodist Church in Fiji, who was appointed as the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches of the General Assembly in 2018. So he's a new leader. And yes, that came after I was engaged. So just to say, you're most welcome. Although I had the joy of being on the same panel discussions with our UN presentations around the decade in solidarity with people of African descent. And he was present there. We thank God for his witness at that level. He has been active in reviving the Pacific Conference of Churches relationships. He's been recruiting new partners and increasing the organization's visibility, as well as introducing a 5-year strategic plan. Reverend Bakwan holds a Bachelor of Divinity from the Pacific Theological College and a Master's in Theology from Korea. I believe that's probably South Korea. So we welcome him, we give thanks for him, and Reverend Bakwan, you are on. You're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Angelique, if I may call you Angelique.
But of course.
Please call me James in the questions. I'd like to begin, as we do in our culture, by acknowledging the place where I am coming to you from, the city of Suva in the province of Rewa, on the main island of Viti Levu in Fiji, which is connected to the Pacific and to all of you through the Pacific Ocean. I acknowledge our ancestors of the past and our ancestors of the future, and those who are giving us the legacy that we have to uphold, as well as those to whom we owe a legacy of the future. Acknowledge that we are part of creation, part of the land, part of the sea, and part of the sky. And I greet you all in the way in which we do in Fiji with the words Bula Vinaka. It's usually translated to tourists as howdy, but in the depth of the understanding, the word Bula means life, and the word Vinaka means wellness, means abundance. And so when we greet you, Bula Vinaka, we're actually saying, may you have abundant life. May you have life in the fullness, very much related to the context of John 10:10. And so I greet you all with my prayer for each one of you and all those joining in, that you may all have, especially in these difficult times, life in abundance. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to join you on this panel, and I'm just going to share a slide for us, a couple of slides while I'm talking, just as a background, so you don't have to keep looking at me. Although if you like to look at the picture behind me, I can always sort of just duck out of the way. But in this context, I think it's very important as we gather virtually or online, given that we are in this new norm of COVID-19, and I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity to talk about issues like climate justice, because one of the fears that we have had in the Pacific is that COVID-19, while it is a global pandemic and much attention and energy needs to be given to this pandemic, it's important it does not come at the cost to climate justice, which still remains the existential threat for this planet. I talk about weaving because in the Pacific, weaving is what we do. Often it's thought of only as women's work, but in the process of weaving, everybody is involved. It is a communal process. It is a process in which everyone participates. Everyone has a role, and everyone has a sense of contribution to a process. And the process of weaving also ensures finding the right strands to weave together, and that together we are able to have a beautiful mat that has a purpose, a function, and most importantly, allows people to come together. And so some strands that I would like to think that we need to consider in the context of addressing climate justice. The issue of development, industrial, extractive agendas, whether we talk from the forest to the fish to fossils and everything in between, issues around economic policy and legislation. What is the role of academia in responding to this? What is the role of indigenous spirituality and faith in terms of recognizing indigenous peoples' connection and rootedness to land, sea, and sky? And of course, our understanding in the Christian perspective that we are not apart from creation, but that we are a part of creation. What are the lived experiences of those at the forefront of climate change? How do we weave together gender and ability, and of course, intergenerational weaving, the elderly, the youth, and our vulnerable children? So these are some things I would briefly like us to reflect on. And in the conversation that we're going to have, I bring these three, I guess, perspectives of how we see the issue of climate justice, the issue of home and identity, the issue of voyaging and wayfinding, and the issue of hospitality and reciprocity. You see three different types of weaving on this screen. One is a mat for sitting and sleeping. The same type of mat is used for sailing, and the same type of weaving is done in the baskets for which we collect and present food to one another. If we're able to weave together all of those things that I've mentioned, there is an opportunity for us to weave a rich and vibrant tapestry that affirms and celebrates community, sacred spaces, and the cycle of life. One of the challenges we've faced in our work on the issue of climate change is the fact that a lot of approaches to climate change have been secular, and they have failed in the Pacific. And the question has always been asked, why do climate projects that are secular do not have the impact that people expect to have on paper? And the reality is that in our Pacific community, and the Pacific Conference of Churches is made up of 42 member churches and national councils of churches spread across the bulk of the Pacific Ocean, from the bottom of in the southern part in New Zealand or Aotearoa, the west to West Papua, the east to Maui Nui, French Polynesia, and up to the north to the Marshall Islands. 90+% of that region is Christian, and not only have indigenous spiritual worldviews, but very Christian worldviews. And this has been realized in terms of how we address and respond to the issue of climate justice. And so the role of the church here in our region, as Angelique will have experienced during her visit and others, is very, very important. The role of the church in terms of addressing issues not only of justice, but dealing pastorally with communities who are affected. And so, as Pacific churches reflecting on the issue of climate change, the first Pacific Church Leaders Statement on Climate Change came out in 2004, well before it was the in thing for governments even in our region. The Osintai Declaration called on countries to address carbon emissions. Yet in 2009, so 11 years ago, we put out what we called the Moana Declaration, where we had already started to realize that we were going to look towards, a need to look towards the issue of resettlement, of relocation, of displacement. And how does that work in a region that is separated by water, where we have so many coral islands, coral atolls, where we need to figure out how do people move, what are the situations, and that we would have internal and external migration. And so what are the justice issues around that? Particularly when most developed nations support for climate action, as they call it, is really around mitigation and adaptation, not dealing with the issues of the people on the ground. And in many of the discussions that we've had with communities as we've gone to the climate meetings, the COP meetings, we talk about both the economic and the non-economic loss and damage, the costs for our people. In the Pacific, our context for the next few years is based around the theme, Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land. Of course, that is taken from Psalm 137, the cry of the people in Babylon. How do we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And we've added that we look at strange times as well. And COVID-19 is an example of the strange times that we are living in. And so over this few years, we are looking at these types of songs for us to sing. Yes, lament, but how do we continue to praise God in the difficult situations? How do we address freedom, self-determination, and other issues? In the context of climate change, we have both slow and rapid onset impacts. And the biggest of these, of course, is natural disasters such as severe tropical cyclones. And so we've been going through cyclones where we are facing displacement from cyclones. We are facing people who are being uprooted from their very homes. The places where they have planted the umbilical cord of their children to say, this is your home. The place where they have grown up and they now have to move. How do they move and leave their ancestors and their families in these situations? And so for us at PCC, we're trying to work around how do we work with those who will leave, whether they view that as exile or exodus. How do we work with those who will receive these communities, whether we are able to foster radical hospitality and neighborhood. And those who cannot leave, who cannot bring themselves to leave, how do we then provide the costly accompaniment? I'll leave it there. I know there are times for questions and answers, but just to leave you with this last image, this is one of the communities that is about to be relocated or in the process of being relocated. A small village, 144 people, 27 houses, and so far only 7 have been relocated. This is what they look to every morning. And this is their reality if we're not able to support them and provide the justice and the pastoral care that they need. So thank you, Angelique. I hand it back to you for questions and comments.
Well, suffice it to say, that was very rich, James. We're so grateful for your presentation. And it reminds us of how we are connected with these issues, right? These issues around migration and exile and exodus and the strangeness of living in this moment. Your comments have captured so much of both the universal and the particular issues in the context in which you come. We just want to say thank you so much for getting us started. I just have a couple of questions. I'm sure others will have other questions. But the first is, you really talk about this chasm between the sacred and the secular. These are complementary realities and cosmologies. The ancient traditions and how earth and sky come together. Yes, the Christian faith talks about that, but there are also very indigenous spiritualities around that. And from what I perceive about my work that I've done in the Pacific is that there's tension there, right? That there is tension between how we think about that in these more secularized approaches in the West and other places we could name, and in ancient societies, sacred and secular. I'm interested to know more about how you think about that, because you're someone in leadership who has to do that dance, has to live within both of those worlds. And then my second question would be relative to the issues of movement. I mean, that's part of what climate change is, what it's doing. It's increasing the movements of people. And we talk so much about migration and all these different metaphors of movement. Maybe you could speak a little bit just theologically around the theme around movement. You've spoken about it specifically, and you have alluded to it. You can say more about that, because that's what's affecting all of us. That's one of those universal crises, shocks, climate shocks that we're experiencing, is this issue of movement and families, and the removal of being in the places of identity, where identity has been nurtured and formed, and having to change identities to some extent. Can you speak a bit about these 3 kind of top lines that I would like to engage for just a few minutes?
Sure, thank you. Let me preface this by saying I'm going to begin with movement, because I think that's something that weaves through the 3 questions. In our modern history in the Pacific, the history of movement has been more of one that's shaped around exile. The image behind me is of an island called Rambi, where people from one of the islands in Kiribati, called Banaba or Ocean Island, were relocated in the early 20th century, because the island was being extracted for phosphate mining. And the people were moved basically without knowing where they were being sent. And so we have this example of a forced relocation as a result of the extractive agenda of global, the neoliberal economy. But their traditions and faith, so indigenous knowledge and practices, have enabled them to survive and thrive in a new place. They've held on to that, and that's been the key in terms of identity and giving them a sense of dignity and worth. Of course, we've had movements of indentured laborers being brought from India, and I'm a descendant of that. And so there are a lot of negative connotations around movement. The concern around, as I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of not only physical, but spiritual uprootedness that takes place in the context of climate-induced displacement from an island, which is your home and your whole context, to another place, with no possibility of return because the sea levels are rising. And what does that mean for communities? So this is the modern thinking. But if we look back and go back to what you were saying about in the indigenous spirituality and our indigenous, rich indigenous history and culture, if you go back pre-Western contact, we were a voyaging people. We sailed thousands and thousands of miles of ocean, open ocean, using just the stars to navigate. So a lot of our work is about recapturing that understanding to recognize that we are a people of movement, both in terms of our different indigenous cultures. And of course, we're not a homogenized people in the Pacific. We have 3 or 4 waves of travelers, of voyagers. So we have those who have been, in their islands for thousands of years and tens and hundreds of thousands of years, and those who have only been for 5, 4, or 3,000 years. And so recognizing that those cultures are different, but connecting that sense of movement with an understanding that as the people of God, we are also people on a movement. We're on a journey to the kingdom. And how do we bring those things together? I think there is a fear, not a fear, a lack of understanding by development agencies who do most of this work on responding to crises. The secular agencies do not understand both our indigenous cultural language and spirituality language, and sometimes are challenged by our Christian faith language. And so what we are doing at PCC is finding ways to bring that together through contextualizing our theology, and finding ways to help people express both culturally from an indigenous perspective and from a theological Christian spirituality perspective what they're going through. And I think that's going to be key in how we help people respond to this.
Thank you so much for that substantive response. I will conclude my time with you for this moment around the tapestry. Of course, tapestry suggests that we are all linked together, right? We're all weaved together in some way. Some Christian language would be the body, or, there are different ways to talk about that. But in this moment, we are here at EAD to really talk about how we together go and advocate together on Capitol Hill Wednesday. Can you give any concrete, just a couple of recommendations of what would your recommendations be relative to this tapestry that we all share and what we can do to be responsive? Just 2 concrete recommendations very quickly, and then we'll need to move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the biggest issue right now is the reduction of carbon emissions. And recognizing that in this tapestry, we are perhaps the edge of the mat, in that we are at the forefront of climate change. So what we experience, you will experience if you're not experiencing it already. And that's the important thing for recognize. We are literally a prophetic voice here saying, look what's happening to us. This will happen to you. And I think also to recognize that our Pacific Island governments are working and moving and trying to push this issue at the UN level, at the global level. and encourage your government. And I see with the climate summit that your president is going to be holding, we have representatives from the Pacific there. The UN Human Rights Commission is also looking at having a special rapporteur on climate-induced migration and things like that. So pushing the agenda and just being vocal about it and telling your people, this will happen to you. And if you can't think about us, that's okay. But think about yourselves and your families as well.
James, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to engage you.
Thank you,
We
Angelique.
will come back to you. But right now, we want to move on to our second speaker. We're very delighted to have our next speaker join this conversation. We would like to bring on our next speaker, who is Ms. Bernadette Dimitrov. She is the executive director of Greenwich, and she can say it better probably than I can, but she's on the steering committee. Gwynchia Z. Gwyneth. She was raised in Fort Yukon and spent her summers in Venetia. Bernadette's great-grandmother was Marcy's or Horace Moses from Old Crow from Canada, and her grandfather is also from there as well, from Yukon, Alaska. Her parents are Betty Walter Flitt of Alaska and Bernard Hornsby of Louisiana. And Bernadette is the mother of 5 children and a grandmother of 5 beautiful grandchildren. She takes this position very seriously and has transformed her life to better serve her people. Bernadette stands strong to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refugee Coastal Plain, the Porcupine Caribou Herd, and the Gwich'in Way of Life. Bernadette is a council member for the Arctic Refuge Defense Council, and she also serves as an advisory board member for NDN Collective, the Care of Creations Task Force, Native Movement Alaska, and also defend the Sacred Alaska. She is a tribal member of the Greenwich Tribal Government and on the Leadership Council for the ITR. She continues to use her voice for what she believes she stands strong to, which is to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge Coastal Plain, the Porcupine Caribou Herd, and the Greenwich Way of Life. Her identity is non-negotiable. We will never sell our culture and our traditional lifestyle for any amount of money. This is a direct quote from her. Bernadette, you are most welcome. Thank you so much. I want to apologize for any mispronunciation I may have rendered. It was not my head. It was my head, but it was not my heart. And I'm so glad you're here to correct me and to make your claim and your presentation known. God bless you. We look forward to what you have to share.
Bernadette Dementif Oji, Kujaja Kutsan Ethli, Shoji Betty Foot Oji, Shahan Betty Foot Oji, Shiti Bernard Hornsby Oji, Shitsu Margaret Horace Oji, Shitsi Daniel Horace Oji, Shitsi Gavakwa. I just told you that my name is Bernadette Dementif and I am from Fort Yukon, Alaska. My mother is Bernard Hornsby and Betty Flitt. And my grandparents are Daniel and Margaret Horace. My great grandmother was Marcis Moses, who walked from Canada to Fort Yukon. I'm here at the direction of my elders on behalf of the Gwich'in Nation of Alaska and Canada. I'm the executive director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee, which was founded in 1988 by the elders and chiefs of the Gwich'in Nation, which spans throughout Alaska and Canada. We were told we were going to be rich, we were going to have all this money, but there was one of our elders, Sarah Abel. She is the one who requested the first gathering, the first one of its kind in over 150 years. And she told us that we are already rich in our culture. We are already rich in our way of life. We may not be rich in the Western way, but we are rich in our way of life. We still very much live off of our land and our animals. I may live in a bigger community. I don't live in Fort Yukon. I try to go as much as I possibly can. But with this work right now, we are under attack, not only by climate change, but we were attacked for the last 4 years and by our own government that is seeking to destroy our sacred land in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which known to us as Ejik Gotsan Gondai Gotlit, the sacred place where life begins. It is so sacred that we do not step foot there. This is where the caribou go to have their calves. And as a mother myself, I know how special that feeling and that time is, and how you work together with your child to bring them into this world. And our animals are not any different. We highly respect our land, our water, our animals, our air, our plants. We believe that Creator blessed us with this area to caretake, not to destroy and see what we can get out of it, not to sell it for any amount of money. I like money. I mean, but none of it's going to negatively impact my future generations. I'd like to just share with some of what Reverend James said, and thank you. We are all connected. We are all connected. What happens here is going to happen there. We are all ground zero. No matter where you look in this world, we are all ground zero. And it's time that we stick our differences aside and we come together. And I know we can't stop climate change, but we can prepare our future generations. I would like to also acknowledge that I am on the Lower Tanana Dene people's ancestral homelands, which is always overlooked. And I thank Reverend James again for acknowledging that we are on ancestral homelands of many people that have been here before us, that have been taking care of these lands. And right now, in the state of Alaska, we have an elected leadership that is working against the indigenous people. And we're not going to allow it any longer. That's why I'm so grateful to be here. The Gwich'in and the Caribou, our creation story tells us that there was a time we were able to communicate. We made a vow to each other that we would take care of each other. I know that a lot of people will never understand that. But a piece of my heart lies within the caribou, and a piece of the caribou heart lies within ours. And there was a time we were able to communicate. And if you look at the migratory route of the caribou and the Gwich'in communities, our ancestors settled us on the migratory route so that we can continue to live and thrive off these animals. But because of oil development, pipelines, and climate change, our animals have their migratory changed. But that doesn't make us any less Gwich'in. That doesn't make us any less indigenous. My food, my freezer is filled with traditional food. I cannot live without traditional food. When I travel for work and I come home, my husband has fish or moose or caribou. He has something, and I thought it was in my head at first. But when I eat it, I feel some strength come back into my body. And right now in Alaska, just as any other place, we are ground zero. We have 33 coastal communities, eroding into the ocean. We have dead fish in our lakes and our rivers, dead birds literally falling out of the sky from starvation. We have record-breaking fires where we can't even come out of our homes. I couldn't come out for 3 days. I couldn't let my pets out for 3 days. It was so smoky. We have sinkholes. And then we have an elected leadership that is pushing for oil development. If you look all across Alaska, from the Tongass Forest to the Bristol Bay, to the NPR, to the Ambler Road, to the Arctic Refuge, to the Yukon Flats, we are under attack. Our ways of life is at risk, and we need help. We need help yesterday. And our animals are suffering. Our animals cannot tell us that they are sick. They can't tell us that they are suffering. And they can't tell us that they do not understand what's happening with the environment. Many of them are falling through the ocean, they're falling through the river at a time when the river is supposed to be frozen. The Gwich'in Steering Committee, we just organized our new generation of youth, a youth council, that we are teaching about how extremely important our way of life is, and that our elders survived some of the coldest, harshest winters so that we can be here. And we owe that same dedication and respect to our future generations. And we will never give up. We don't have the option of giving up. At 5 o'clock, we don't go home and turn off. You know, it's always on our mind. Our ways of life. We are living in two ever-changing worlds. But our way of life matters. We matter. We are mothers. I have 6 grandchildren, and I am scared for their future. The stories that my elders have told me when I was in 1991 is happening right now. And the rest of the story, it scares me. And so I just, I want to just encourage you guys to keep using your voices. That's one of the most powerful tools that you have. And Creator put you in this position for a reason. And that is to use your voice. So I just want to say Masit Cho on behalf of the Gwich'in Nation. We ask you to check our website, ourarcticrefuge.org. And just thank you for having me. Masit Cho.
Well, Bernadette, you have left me speechless. I'm a Baptist minister, but I am left to be speechless and to stand in awe of your willingness to speak the truth and to sit in awe of your leadership. Your passion, your truth telling, and your spirit goes before you. And I just want to name this sacred moment of recognizing who you are and whose you are. And for your willingness to gift us in such a vulnerable way of the pain and the horror and the sense of alarm that all of us should be experiencing in this moment when it comes to the urgency of climate change and all of the related issues that go into this moment of redefining what it means to be a part of the tapestry that James has already spoken to. Bernadette, I just feel we need to just pause, all of us, and be quiet for just a moment. And then I have just one follow-up question for you, following. May I invite everyone for just a moment of silence, just around the horrors that the truth has been told through Bernadette and through James. In this just this moment of pause. And then I want to follow up with Bernadette. Will you join me in this moment of pause and alarm? Amen and Ashe. And thank you so much for allowing me to invite that moment. Bernadette, my follow-up question is really very simple. You've been very clear. Your resolve is very clear. Your truth-telling is very clear. What other recommendations might you offer to us in this moment to follow up on all of what you've named for us to really hear again, so that when we go to Capitol Hill on Wednesday, we are really absolutely clear and transparent about anything else you want to say to us in this moment? Bernadette, thank you again. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. We are very strong believers in the power of prayer. So I would like you to please continue to pray for us. Not just the Gwich'in, but for all people impacted. I would like to, we're asking the government to buy back the lease sales that are in our sacred lands. We're asking everybody to write to their congressman, congresswoman, write to the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland. This process was done in a very sloppy and disrespectful way to the indigenous people of Alaska. And it needs to be redone because our voices were dismissed, ignored, and that's not, they're not following their own forefathers' laws. So we just ask you to just, from the UN, we testified there last year, and the actual UN sided with the Gwich'in and demanding an investigation. So write to them, they're called CERD, and to the government, definitely to the president, and let him know this is one of the last untouched ecosystems in the world. And that might be why some people do it. We do it because we don't have a choice. We didn't come looking for a fight. It came to our front door. And I'm just standing up for my children's birthright.
Thank you, Bernadette. And it's my understanding you'll have to leave us early, but would you please not leave without putting something in the chat of how it is we could follow up? I believe also my colleagues with Rebecca and Catherine might also provide some resources so that we can further accompany you in your journey. And thank you so much for being a part of our time together. God bless you, my sister. So we thank Bernadette for her powerful presentation, as well as from James. Dear all, we want to now move to our third speaker. We are very blessed to have with us Mr. Guido Cortez. He's the director of the Center of Estudios Regional de Tunisia, the Center for Regional Studies for the Development of Tunisia. CERDET, as I understand, is the acronym for the organization. They specialize in organizing and providing support to the local organizations, vulnerable groups, and indigenous communities of the American Grand Chaco and in Tunisia, Bolivia. Their mission is to strengthen communities' internal democracy, as well as their economic and political self-determination at both the local and the regional levels. Born and raised in the south of Bolivia, Guido holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Buenos Aires, UBA, Argentina. He was a junior researcher in the project, Rural Bolivian Migrants from Tunisia to Argentina, for the Strategic Research Program in Bolivia, PIEB, in 1998. He was a visiting professor at the Public University in Tunisia in 2006 and 2009. It is my pleasure to welcome you to speak at this time. Thank you for being with us.
Muchas gracias, Angélica. En primer lugar, quiero agradecerles a todos ustedes y también al Presbyterian Hunger Program por invitarme a participar en este evento. Les hablo desde Bolivia, especialmente desde el sur, en la frontera con Argentina y Paraguay, en una región que se conoce como el Gran Chaco, que es una gran llanura, y una región muy conocida por tener calores extremos durante más o menos 8 meses al año, también conocida por tener una crónica escasez de agua para la producción y también para el consumo, una región que es muy grande, que es el doble del tamaño de Alemania y que digamos, cubre una superficie de unos 386.000 millas cuadradas, es bastante grande, en 3 países, en Argentina, en Bolivia y Paraguay, y donde existen todavía 25 grupos étnicos indígenas adaptados a una región muy complicada, muy difícil de vivir, y quienes están buscando recuperar sus territorios tradicionales que fueron colonizados y fueron expropiados por poblaciones que llegaban como migrantes. Los mayores desafíos que vemos en todo el Gran Chaco americano y en Bolivia están relacionados con los fenómenos climáticos imprevistos que también suceden en otras partes del mundo, cada vez con mayor frecuencia. Estos fenómenos climáticos incluyen sequías muy prolongadas, de 6 a 7 meses, problemas de vientos muy fuertes, que no son huracanes, pero son vientos muy fuertes de 80 a 90 kilómetros, que duran unos 20 minutos. A veces días de frío extremo, que afectan los cultivos, y también afectan incluso la cría de animales pequeños, con lo que una región se ve muy afectada porque es muy complicado producir alimentos con calores extremos, y a las tradicionales enfermedades tropicales como la malaria, el mal de Chagas, ahora enfrentamos nuevas enfermedades tropicales como el dengue, el Zika, chikungunya, etc. En estos mismos bosques nativos, que también son afectados, por ejemplo, tenemos problemas para cosechar la miel, hay muerte de abejas. En el caso del Pilcomayo que pueden ver en la imagen, es un río milagroso porque atraviesa 3 países, Argentina, Paraguay y Bolivia, y las poblaciones indígenas viven del pescado del río, y este río tan maravilloso es afectado por la contaminación minera que se realiza en la zona andina, en la zona alta, conocida como la zona andina o zona de Potosí y Oruro, ¿no? Entonces, a este problema de la minería está ocasionado por la fuerte presencia de empresas canadienses, empresas japonesas, empresas chinas, que explotan y exportan minerales, junto con otras empresas bolivianas que contaminan gravemente los ríos sin tener inversión para remediar los daños, y generan daño a la salud y daño al medio ambiente. Yo siempre digo que es una contradicción en que nuestro país, Bolivia, es conocido porque tiene un discurso de que amamos a la madre tierra, pero siempre digo también, parece que amamos más también al padre dólar. la gente está muy, digamos, muy interesada en la riqueza económica, pero a veces el costo es el medio ambiente, ¿no? Y cuesta entender cómo podemos justificar todavía el uso de cianuro y mercurio para extraer metales preciosos como el oro. Finalmente, estos daños ambientales están provocando lentamente una expulsión de la población local para que migren hacia afuera. La gente poco a poco va buscando nuevas ciudades, incluso nuevos países, ¿no? En el caso de Argentina. Nosotros creemos que la migración es un derecho humano. La gente puede elegir dónde vivir, dónde salir, dónde viajar, pero también muchas veces hay familias que salen como expulsadas porque su lugar ya no es posible habitarlo, y por eso nos interesa mucho trabajar que esas comunidades puedan ser habitables, que puedan ser amigables, donde no haya contaminación, donde haya un clima que pueda hacer la gente adaptarse al clima en su producción local. Como organización boliviana, somos una organización pequeña boliviana, trabajamos en alianzas con otras. Agradecemos muchísimo el apoyo de iglesias protestantes holandesas, de Estados Unidos, otros grupos católicos de Alemania y Austria, y trabajamos apoyando a centenares de familias indígenas y campesinas, primero para que produzcan alimentos por su propia cuenta. Hemos apoyado mucho la innovación técnica para proteger los cultivos del calor, que es muy fuerte, poniendo mallas o redes que cubren el calor. Hemos trabajado mucho con sistemas de microriego, a goteo, con sistemas de almacenamiento de agua. Pueden ver en la imagen, son tanques que almacenan agua de lluvia durante 4 o 5 meses, que sirve para el consumo humano y también para la producción de pequeñas hortalizas y frutales. Trabajamos también en la preservación de bosques silvestres, donde la gente encuentra frutos silvestres que tienen alto contenido proteínico, vitamínico, y que queremos hacer harinas para que la gente pueda almacenarlas, conservarlas y guardarlas. Trabajamos con los municipios locales en acciones de reforestación, de cuidado del bosque. Y qué nos interesa hacia adelante es, primero, digamos, decirles que estoy muy sorprendido por el compromiso que tienen muchas iglesias en el mundo ahora por temas como la justicia climática, por buscar que haya un mejor destino para las familias que viven en el mundo con problemas de cambio climático. La justicia climática es un tema estructural, un tema actual muy fuerte, y creo que es a través de las conductas diarias, del testimonio de vida, en el cual, digamos, tienen que mostrar cómo buscar soluciones. Nosotros estamos muy críticos de solamente discursos, de solamente palabras bonitas, porque la acción tiene que ir y ser coherente con el discurso, ¿no? Entonces, por lo menos en nuestros países hay mucha desconfianza hacia la política, mucha desconfianza hacia planes estatales, y esperamos que la conducta de personas que den ejemplo en ese tema para buscar justicia climática es un trabajo que nos corresponde a todos. Finalmente, también creo que, además de la justicia climática, no debe nunca olvidarse la denuncia hacia el racismo entre todos los países, incluso Bolivia, que viene de atravesar problemas sociales y políticos de muchos siglos a través de conflictos históricos, ¿no? Por el colonialismo. Y esperamos también, ahora estamos también involucrados mucho en la denuncia contra la violencia hacia las mujeres y hacia los niños. Yo creo que debe ser un esfuerzo conjunto de todos para que la gente viva con mejor justicia climática, pero también con tema de justicia social, en este caso. Para ir terminando, quiero también remarcar el gran problema que tenemos de corrupción política en nuestros gobiernos locales, departamentales, nacionales. Necesitamos el apoyo e incidencia también de otros países para poder reforzar nuestras sociedades locales, la vida civil, para que podamos tener también controles y equilibrar el poder estatal, que tiene que tener equilibrios, tiene que tener controles. Por último, quiero también mencionar que todos esos problemas también creo que desencadenan en una problemática de la migración a ciudades, migración a otros países. que también puede ser un efecto del cambio climático, y que creemos que la forma no es hacer barreras, no es hacer muros para contener la migración, sino posiblemente por apoyar la inversión de pequeños proyectos locales para producción de alimentos, para generar empleo, para que la gente encuentre un lugar en su mundo sin tener que dejar y abandonar áreas rurales y periurbanas. Como último mensaje, creemos que estamos devorando la naturaleza con nuestras formas de impulsar el consumo de masas, la idea de vivir mejor a través de tener más cosas. También vemos que las empresas mineras y empresas industriales están dejando suelos estériles e infértiles, con fuentes de agua contaminadas, con metales tóxicos. Y también cuando hay una mala gestión del medio ambiente, una contaminación, también se corrompen las decisiones políticas a través de normas, a través de incentivos económicos. Entonces creo que la justicia climática tiene que tomar todos esos ámbitos. Cierro mi mensaje a ustedes a través de que muchas veces nos preguntan qué hacemos nosotros en Bolivia para mitigar el cambio climático, y creemos que no es una pregunta del todo justa, porque las poblaciones indígenas que viven en los bosques, cuidando los árboles, con cultivos locales, criando abejas para producir miel, ellos tienen un muy pequeño aporte al calentamiento global, muy baja emisión de carbono, ya sea porque no tienen vehículos o no tienen industria, y por el contrario, digamos, la producción de árboles frutales, medicinales, permite la absorción del dióxido de carbono. Entonces creo que también tiene que haber una reflexión de parte de los países más ricos del mundo, desarrollados, ya sea en Europa, Norteamérica, China, Japón, donde se produce mayor emisión de huella de carbono, para que también contribuyan a asumir responsabilidades y ayudar a mitigar la emisión de carbono. Muchas gracias por escuchar.
Well, we can't thank you enough for your presentation. It was very rich, and what was so important in your presentation was you're offering solutions, what you are doing in your community to offer solutions and answers to some of the challenges that are being faced there locally. But we want to hear you very well, that we understand that this is a global issue, that the richer countries have a responsibility to be a part of that tapestry that James spoke of earlier and that Bernadette affirmed as well. One question as a follow-up. Given the kinds of solutions that you've come up with, the kinds of projects that you're working on, where do you get the strength for your resilience? Say something more about what drives, what informs your resilience and your willingness and your ability to find these kinds of solutions that you've mentioned in the presentation. Can you speak to that? And then we want to move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, okay, first of all, I would like to, quisiera decir simplemente el mensaje importante para nosotros es la colaboración a través, no importa las religiones, tenemos que romper las barreras de las religiones, tienen que trabajar en forma conjunta. El tema de la cooperación tiene que ser pública y también de grupos privados. Tenemos que buscar tender puentes de comprensión, pero también ser críticos. Yo creo que tenemos que, mientras haya compromiso y acción individual y colectiva, se hacen pequeños cambios. Yo estoy muy agradecido y de joven he estado un poco peleado con la religión, pero a través de los años también veo gente muy sana, muy generosa, que me ha enseñado, ¿no?, que se puede construir, se puede aportar a un mejor futuro. Y también, si bien hay pobreza y hay dolor y sufrimiento, creo que el esfuerzo que hace cada persona, cada iglesia, contribuye a curar, a sanar también estos dolores que tenemos en el mundo, ¿no? Entonces, muchas gracias por la invitación, Angélica, y ustedes.
And thank you so much. Friends, we're going to move right on to the next presenter. We're coming close to the end of our time. We're delighted for the presentations thus far. Now we want to hear from Ms. Sharon Levine.
Angelique, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've had some technical difficulties with Sharon, so she has not actually been able to join us, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear this news. Well, then not to worry. I see that there are a number of questions in the chat and observations, and perhaps we can go there and speak to what the questions and clarifications are. Rebecca, do you have any observations on the questions then?
Yes, we have quite a few questions that have come through. So I will take them kind of one at a time, grouping them together as I see them. But so we've already answered a little bit about how we want some things that we need to ask of our government in the United States. We've already answered some of those questions. So I think I'll ask, James was talking about the global connections and the connections with the UN. So maybe I'll ask Guido, have you made connections with other groups and organizations that are doing similar activities that you're doing in Bolivia?
Thank you, Rebecca, James, and Guido.
Sorry, who's going first?
I'm asking James to go first and then Guido to follow, please.
All right. Thank you for the question. We only are able, and this is the thing about this work. I think we recognize we're only as strong as the links that we have. And again, it comes to this whole process of weaving together. And so we make relationships and partnerships with everyone who wants to work on this issue, whether they are secular or non-secular, whether they're church-based or whatever group that wants to engage with us. I think the more that we know about each other and can draw on each other's strengths and spaces is very important. And so we work primarily with regional groups here in the Pacific, from the Pacific Climate Warriors, who are young people who are articulating that we're not passively drowning with climate change and the sea level rise. We are fighting, to World Council of Churches, to other global and regional organizations that have that network. And so, and I think one of the beauty about the technology we have today is being able to come into different spaces and share our story and support those who wish to take this on as our, to join in this fight, because this is a common struggle for all of us. And I think that's very important for us to understand. And so I'm happy to have PCC engage in any space where we can work together. We attend the COP meetings. We attend every single meeting that we're able to attend in order to ensure that the Pacific Voice and the Pacific churches are present.
Thank you, James. Would you like to follow up, please?
Sí, solamente que sentimos que hay mucha gente joven que está buscando temas que apoyar, ¿no? Causas que apoyar. Muchos adolescentes y jóvenes que quieren involucrarse, y creo que en nuestro caso son gente con la que trabajamos nosotros y también que están más sensibilizados con los temas del ambiente, del medio ambiente, la contaminación, del manejo de los residuos plásticos, del cuidado de los animales, de evitar la violencia hacia niños y a mujeres. Yo creo que necesitamos esto, ¿no? Impulsar especialmente el trabajo con jóvenes, y hay una alianza de muchos países que alianzas a nivel de redes temáticas, hay encuentros, viajes, y hay toda una forma que te vigorizan, que te dan energía para trabajar en estos temas, ¿no? Entonces hay sí una conexión con muchos aliados de iglesias y también que son laicos, de gente de municipios locales y también personas de grupos indígenas, ¿no? Entonces hay mucha fuerza para trabajar en adelante.
Great. Thank you both. James, you mentioned the United Nations COP talks briefly. So I want to ask both of you this question. What do you think of those talks? Is there hope that we can move forward together as a world, as the global world with international agreements? Or are you seeing it more as a regional or individual country level? How do you see the COP talks and the global conversation? Well, James, why
Guido?
don't you start? Or
Oh, okay. Guido, please, would you like to?
Okay. Okay, bueno, si bien es importante los eventos globales como las COP tienen su espacio y es importante estar poniendo en la mesa, en la agenda pública temas importantes. También creo que tenemos que trabajar más a un nivel también nacional, ¿no? Tener varios niveles de intervención, ¿no? No solamente quedarse en niveles globales que son importantes, pero no son suficientes y se debe trabajar también, puede ser alianzas entre países, entre regiones. Hasta ahí. James, if you want, please, James, to answer.
I think the COP meetings are one of the most frustrating meetings I ever attend because I see, I think the first thing is that to recognize that, you know, there is this big barrier because there's the states, parties, the countries having the, you know, the governments having their meeting, civil society, faith, and everybody else is in another room. We're lucky if we get high-profile people to come and speak at the main plenary. I remember in 2017 at the COP in Bonn, which was supposed to be the Pacific COP, chaired by Fiji, the faith community statement was presented at 11 p.m. at night to a pretty much empty plenary session, just so that it could be on the record. And for me, that speaks a lot about where we fit in this process, because we have to recognize that communities, faith communities and other communities are what mobilize the world. There are still, you know, still people, countries that have not agreed to issues around the climate, the Paris talks and the Paris Agreement. They're looking at ways of either backing out, and we're glad to see the US is back in again, but trying to offset previous credits to what's happening now so that they don't have to really make any changes. So I think, you know, when I speak at the side events, it's all the same people every time. So I'm talking to the converted. And I wonder, you know, we continue to go because that's what we do, the whole persistent widow and the judge concept. But I think it's really important for us to work at international level, at national level, but, you know, this change that has to take place, because the core of it is our desire for more. And there needs to be what Pope Francis calls the ecological conversion to take place. Otherwise, our desire for more things will come at the cost of others already and for all of us in the context of this planet.
James, may I have a follow-up with you just very quickly? And that is President Biden is convening this big summit this week. And Pacific, I think you mentioned, is going to be represented there. And I know there have been 5 African countries that have been invited as well. So there are these places of representation in that summit. What is your thought about that, given what you just said, relative to possibilities that may or may not come out of that meeting?
Yeah, I try to be pragmatic and try to be a realistic, but I think as a Christian, I always need to be hopeful of what can come out of this. And I just hope that the talk is matched by the walk at the end of the day. We live in an era of sound bites and, you know, social media where words do not match actions. And I just hope that this is not just being done for show. I'm very confident that our Pacific representative, which is the Marshall Islands, who have a connection with the United States, of course, but also at the forefront of climate change and have been very vocal on this issue, will represent us well as Aotearoa, New Zealand. But we really need to see a shift from a business understanding in terms of production, in terms of extractive industries. And really that's where it's going to be understood. And the challenge is really for those in business and the industrial countries, the big businesses, to recognize that there is actually profit if they don't want, and as much as we want to call them out on issues of justice, on doing what is right, but also that doing what is right is actually profitable in this sense as well, to make the shifts to green energy, to make those shifts. They're all riding it as far as they can go. So let's tell them that this is the time now to change. Don't wait for another 10 years. Make the shift now. And I think one of the biggest powers that we have, particularly in those countries with large economies, is the power of the individual and collective wallet. That we need to put our money and say, we will not buy these products, we will not buy these cars, we will not do those things. And that culture needs to change. And I think if the Christian community or faith communities can stand up to do that, we're going to see some change take place. So it's at it's at all the different levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you have a last question we could render, and then I'll summarize, and then we can have a concluding time together?
Yes, we've seen a couple questions come through as to how do we get the attention of the folks in these corporations and the folks that make the decisions and have the power to do this. So I'm going to offer a suggestion, and then I'll let you, James, and Guido offer your suggestions as well. But on Wednesday, we have a lobby day. We've set up some visits for folks with their senators, and we have a script for you to call in to any of these offices, your representative, your senator's office, if you don't want to attend in person to the lobby day. And we'll have an action alert that'll go out. So the more that you tell your representatives that this issue is important to you, the more they have to do something about it, whether that's just saying, oh, form letter, yes, I'm concerned about this. But the more that you talk about it in your communities, to your local representatives, to your local leaders, to your U.S. federal representatives, the more they hear from their constituents, the more that they're going to be pushed to come up with an answer to these questions and to defend and justify the reasons why they don't want to push for climate justice. So, show up to your town halls if you can. Do all of this pushing. Talk about it in church. It is a faith issue, as we've been talking about. It is an issue for God. So I'll put that as my suggestion. The more that you raise your voice to your representatives, and the more that they hear from us as people of faith specifically, right? I think most people in Congress now claim some form of religion. The more that you can use your religion to say, this is why this is important to me, I think the more that they listen personally. But that's my suggestion. So James and Guido, do you have any other suggestions for getting the attention of people in power?
Yeah, it's amazing the power of the lobby groups and the big businesses in the US. And so, one pebble is all it takes to fell a giant. Find that pebble. I just want to say something very quickly. I see Sarah just put a thing about Elon Musk. I just want to note that we have to be very careful about how we embrace and read into people who are promoting new technologies and green technologies. The same guy who wants to get the world of fossil fuels is about to destroy acres and acres of land in West Papua, driving indigenous people off to build his space launch pad. So please, I encourage you to, the most important thing you can do is read more and learn more and know the stories of our stories, the stories in all the different parts of the world. Because when you take that, you take our stories, you take us with you. And, when you take us with you in your heart and in your mind, you are much stronger in your engagement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. Guido, do you want to give us your response?
Solo reconocer la importante fuerza que tiene justamente el lobby en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Son un ejemplo otros países que vemos cómo ustedes pueden influir, incidir con congressmen, senadores. Entonces me parece importante el esfuerzo que hacen y creo que es valioso y es efectivo. Y ojalá podamos también nosotros también copiar ese tipo de modelo de...
Guido, hold on 1 second. We can't hear the translation.
Okay.
It's okay now? We're good? Okay.
Sí. Repito, Rebeca. Decía que es muy importante reconocer el valor que tiene la incidencia que hacen en Estados Unidos, en el Congreso y también a otros niveles, con senadores. Me parece una buena estrategia de incidencia y simplemente hay que priorizar, creo, ¿no? Hay que priorizar temas, tal vez por año, priorizar 2 o 3 causas importantes para que no se diluyan en todos los reclamos, ¿no? Esta vez como hacer como campañas anuales por 2 o 3 temas que es importante. Nada más.
Well, thank you all so much. We're at the end of the time of the formal plenary around the panel discussions. We are so grateful. I think Rebecca already has said it well. We are gearing up for Wednesday. That's what these stories are all about, is moving to action, not only to hear, to listen, but to also act. And Wednesday is our opportunity to do so. But I really want to pause and just give thanks to God that our colleagues and brothers and sisters from around the world have had the willingness to share their stories and to do so in a very transparent way. And so this is now our opportunity to do the same, to tell their stories and any other stories that our congressional leaders need to hear in this moment. So we thank you. I want to turn it back over to Rebecca and to Annika and Christian and to say thank you. It's been a pleasure to serve you. God bless.
Thank you so much, Angelique. And again, I just want to say thank you to our panelists and our moderators for that wonderful discussion. During this panel, we've heard about the intimate connection between all of creation, the earth, humans, animals, and how that connection has been interrupted, and the pain and anguish that comes as a result of the intersectionality of climate change and many systemic issues like racism, extractivism, capitalism. And as Reverend Dr. Angelique and Rebecca have mentioned, EAD is a moment for action. We have the opportunity to engage with our members of Congress and influence legislation that will speak to the issues that have been brought up today. So thank you again to our panelists for giving us a glimpse of your reality, what's going on in your communities, and for calling us to action. And, I challenge everyone here that as we are preparing for Lobby Day, to keep these conversations in mind and keep the things that have been mentioned here in mind as we're going into these offices. So with all of that being said, I will pass it over to Annika, who will give us some closing announcements.
Thanks, Christian. So the announcements for today are the next round of workshops starts at 7 p.m. Oh. Still muted? Mm-hmm. Okay, can you hear me now? No?
I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Annika.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay,
Annika.
great.
I was still on the English channel, so I couldn't hear you.
That's kind of funny. Okay. Oh, well, glad it's working. So the next round of workshops starts at 7 p.m. tonight Eastern time. And there's a ton of excellent options to choose from. And because of that, you might be interested in more than one at once, and that's fine because they're all going to be recorded. So even if you have to pick between two of your favorites, you'll still get to see one later in a recording. So keep that in mind, and so you won't have to get too disappointed. And the other thing that's happening tonight is, because we're not gathered in person, of course, we can't watch a documentary together, but we encourage you to check out the listing of documentaries that we have on the schedule, and that is going to be under documentary sharing and viewing. And so you will see what eco-justice documentaries we recommend and where you can view them. So definitely check that out, and it'll be great to see what you guys think of them. As a reminder, tomorrow workshops start at 11 a.m. and the Ask Plenary starts at 1 p.m. And that'll be followed by state breakouts. So we have a lot coming up, and we're really excited to do it all together. So finally, one more thing is, if you are on social media, if you're on social media and you're posting about EAD, please use hashtags, hashtag EAD 2021 and hashtag ActNow, and you'll connect with our e-community. So that's all the announcements for now. Thank you, panelists and panelist organizers, and my fellow MC, Christian.
The world is in God's hands, which are